Welcome, everyone. My name is Teresa Derrick Mills, and I'm your Urban Institute host today. This is the second webinar in our series on measuring and supporting policy changes, lessons learned by CCDF lead agency research partnerships. In this April 20 session, we are focusing on measuring and supporting child-teacher interactions, a state and tribal story. We're so glad to see you all arriving. Next slide. First, I need to cover some housekeeping items. We want to make sure that you know this webinar is being recorded. We have closed captioned turned on. If you'd like to adjust your settings, you can click the live transcription button at the bottom. The recording, slides, and transcript will be posted online, and links will be emailed to participants when the materials are ready. Throughout the event, all participants will be muted. Please type your questions or comments into the chat box at any time. You can see we've got it turned on so that you can all see each other. We will be taking clarifying questions at the end of each presentation, with more discussion at the end of the webinar. We especially welcome questions and comments from CCDF lead agency staff, as these are our primary audience for the webinar, but we know that everyone here will be able to learn something. Next slide. Next, I want to note today that I'm in my role as the Deputy Project Director of the Center for Supporting Research on CCDBG Implementation. The center is supported through the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation, or OPRE, in the Administration for Children and Families, ACF, and managed through a contract with the Urban Institute. Our OPRE project officer is Alicia Blandon, and my center colleagues, Julia Isaacs, the project director, and Laura Wagner, our project assistant, are supporting me behind the scenes today. The goal of the center is to support CCDF lead agencies in building research and evaluation capacity. Center activities include building child care research capacity through web events like this one, and written materials, and supporting grant teams with CCDBG implementation research and evaluation planning and implementation grants. You can learn more about this center and our activities at the links that my colleague Laura has just put into the chat. Next slide. So today we have an array of really great panelists to provide information. Our panelists today are representatives from two of those CCDBG implementation research and evaluation grant teams that I was just talking about. And while I'm doing this brief introduction, my colleague Laura will also post a little more information about each speaker into the chat. First, we'll hear from our friends on the Cook Inlet Tribal Council team, represented by Brittany Serralta, Director for Employment and Training Services at Cook Inlet Tribal Council, Connie Wers, Senior Director of the Claire Swan Early Learning Center at the Cook Inlet Tribal Council, and Hattie Harvey, who is the Associate Professor of Psychology at the University of Alaska, Anchorage. Next, we'll hear from our friends on the Georgia team, represented by Thea Stevens, the Infant Toddler Program Manager for the Georgia Department of Early Care and Learning, and Shana Funk, who's the Lead Policy and Business Operations Analyst for the Georgia Department of Early Care and Learning. As you can see from their job titles, they represent many different perspectives for all of us to learn from. Before we get into the substance of our presentation today, we want to take a moment to get to know everyone who is listening a little bit more. Brittany, could you please lead us in a welcome?
Good morning. My name is Brittany Serralta, and I work for Cook Inlet Tribal Council. I'm originally born and raised in Kodiak, Alaska, and a lifelong Alaskan resident. I have two amazing children and am married to my wonderful husband, Oliver. Cook Inlet Tribal Council recognizes the land on which all Alaskans live. CITC extends our deepest appreciation and gratitude to the Dena'ina people for allowing us to use their Indigenous land to provide our services. I appreciate you all for allowing me to honor Alaska Native traditions by acknowledging my family and who we are, as this shapes how we move forward. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Brittany. And now we'd love to hear from all of you, everybody who's on the webinar, who's listening, who's participating. Please type into chat where you're from and anything else you'd like to share about yourself. And I know a number of people typed in as we were getting started. It's great to see folks. I see Florida and Texas and Colorado and a number of different tribes, folks from all over. We also have a poll, and we'd like to get a sense of your roles for the folks that are joining us today. So who's joining us today? Are you a representative of a state or territory CCDF lead agency staff person, or maybe a tribal CCDF lead agency staff person, an external researcher, a federal staffer, a TA provider, or someone else? Everybody could take a moment to answer. Then we'll share back the poll. Great, I can see we've got folks from all kinds of roles. Ivy, when you're ready, you want to share the poll? Wow, great. So I can see that we've got 23% of the folks joining us, almost a quarter are CCDF state and territory staff, 18% who are tribal, 13% external researchers, 5% federal, 9% TA providers, and 31% others. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Okay, next slide. So our focus today includes the motivation for, key ingredients of, key partnerships, research approaches, and lessons learned for 2 policy researcher partnerships. First, we'll be hearing about focusing on culturally responsive teaching in early learning for Indigenous children in Alaska. And then next, we'll hear Georgia's Lifting Infants and Toddlers Through Language-Rich Environments, or LITTLE grants. As you listen, think about why the teams have different approaches to measuring and supporting child-teacher interactions. We encourage you to post questions in chat throughout the presentations. We'll have some time at the end of each presentation for clarifying questions, and others may help us answer questions in the chat during the presentations. At the end, we'll have a kind of an overarching discussion. And as you listen, especially think about the role of culture and the different goals that Cook Inlet Tribal Council and Georgia are trying to achieve. All right, next slide. So now I'm going to turn it over to our friends at the Cook Inlet Tribal Council to talk about their Fostering Culturally Responsive Teaching and Early Learning for Indigenous Children in Alaska project. Brittany?
Good morning again. We would like to thank you all today for attending our presentation on fostering culturally responsive teaching and early learning for Indigenous children in Alaska. You are able to see our introduction slide for those of us presenting today. However, I would also like to recognize Dr. Diane Hirschberg, who is also with us today as a panelist and is the director for UAA's Institute of Social and Economic Research and vice president of UArctic. Next slide. Our team is composed of 4 separate entities consisting of Cook Inlet Tribal Council, Claire Swan's Early Learning Center, THREAD, and the University of Alaska Anchorage Institute of Social and Economic Research. CITC is a tribal nonprofit organization primarily serving Alaska Native and American Indians. Within our Employment and Training Services Department, we house a CCDF program, and we are the tribal lead agency for Anchorage. We have over 200 childcare providers, and we work extremely close with the Office of Childcare within the state of Alaska for licensing. Claire Swan is CITC's tribally operated early Head Start childcare facility, serving children from 6 weeks to 3 years. UAA's Institute of Social and Economic Research, in partnership with the Department of Psychology, is our research partner on this project. And THREAD Alaska is Alaska's childcare resource and referral network, offering services to families, early childhood educators, early childhood education programs, and communities statewide. Next slide. Connie?
It says the camera is turned off by the operator, not me though. Thank you. It's good to be here. I appreciate it. Alaska context. Alaska has 231 federally recognized tribes, 21 Indigenous Alaska Native languages, and over 100 dialects, and even more subdialects. We have 5 major cultural groups, and Anchorage is what we call Alaska's biggest village. Claire Swan opened our doors just over 4 years ago, and our policy council asked leadership to ensure that our curriculum would meet the needs of our families. This was a big test, considering that Anchorage is the home of 231 federally recognized tribes, and over 20 languages are spoken. Our team worked together with an advisory board and council to determine what we have in common in order to develop a curriculum that was clearly, and this was clearly stated in our entryway. And this is a quote that comes from our chairwoman, Claire Swan. Next slide. Claire Swan grew up, is a Dena'ina woman and grew up in Kenai. One of her quotes, and it's actually on our stationery, is "Time is passing by us on little children's feet." And I remember Claire saying this since I was a teenager. And on the wall it says, her quote, "Dena'ina lived with the seasons, knowing where you were, what time of year it was, and what to do at that time was how to live and prosper. They taught their children the same. Knowing these things brought confidence through awareness of how to live with value, respecting self and those around you and our earth. From her insight and wisdom, our board chair had given us the inspiration to move forward, allowing us not to attempt to focus a curriculum on such diverse languages, but to move forward to meet all of our families and develop a curriculum based on a sense of place and time." Next slide. Silku. Silku, together as one. Cultural programming, curriculum designed around 6 seasons, traditional values, and Head Start framework, and multi-generational relationships. Silku, together as one, is one of our basic approaches because we have such diverse groups of folks, whether it happens to be Inupiat, Yupik, Tsimshian, Anungan. We have folks all together in our program. So we are one people, even though we come from different tribes. And our curriculum was designed based on 6 seasons: almost fall, fall, winter, almost spring, and summer. It is also designed, excuse me, I didn't turn off my pop-ups. It is also designed with Head Start's early learning framework, and we address social emotional approaches to learning, language and literature, cognitive, perceptual, motor, physical development to ensure a breadth and depth of learning through our way of life. Our curriculum also includes multi-generational approach, not only with the infant toddler in mind, but with parents and elders alike. Culturally, we show respect to our elders as we include connections to them in our lessons. For example, in our berries unit, we have children picking berries and we hide them in the classroom for them to find. We talk about shape, color, sharing, and traditional values. But we've also written and published a book called Making a Guduk. We read this with our little ones, but this Making a Guduk also includes a QR code to a video of an elder making a Guduk for our children and families to watch. We send these ingredients home with our little ones and our families, and we post pictures on our website. A child's portfolio workbook has been designed for each season as well, and the children's work, pictures of them, and with the berries included, it's a place for families to put pictures of their children, but also to include their heritage. We also ask that the parents put a response page. And prior to Westernization, children grew up learning by being with their family, and our creator designed that the family are the first classroom and they're children's first teachers as the creator designed. We work with them to help ensure not only that our children are ready for school, but our children know that family is who we are. Thank you.
Hello, thank you, Connie, for highlighting the important work that you do at Claire Swan and the integral focus on cultural programming. I really want to kind of reiterate and emphasize that in this setting, as in many programs that are focused on increasing cultural responsive programming, culture really is not an add-on, right? It's not an afterthought, but really, as Connie has emphasized and in the work that she and her program have done, is really that it's an integral, it's the foundation of everything they do, really, in that guiding tenet. And so thinking about the partnership as you come in with that lens of the research partnership, really need to be attuned, right, attuned and responsive to this lens. So next, I'm going to expand a little bit more on the partnership, which was a collaborative inquiry process, certainly as emphasized in this grant, in that connection between research partnerships with community. So this research practice policy partnership really included multiple components, multiple research activities and outcomes. And for the purpose of this webinar today, we're really focusing more specifically on one of the research activities that really links to the child-teacher interactions and curriculum planning. So our primary research question in this particular component was, what is and how do we measure culturally responsive practice in an Alaskan and Indigenous early care and learning setting? Now, one of the impetus behind this question is really, we know there are a lot of well-validated assessment measures and tools for looking at teacher-child interactions and evaluating curriculum, but really thinking about where does some of those lens and approaches come from, and as a research partner, really being attuned to kind of some of that Indigenous research methodologies, which value the community voice, value the community needs and what's important to them. So this research activity that was really linked to this question, I'll go more in depth in the next slide, resulted in what we're calling the development of the guidelines for culturally responsive reflective practice in birth to 5 settings. It's a little mouthful, but those are the guidelines that have come out of this research partnership. And a little bit more Claire Swan. And I believe Laura just put in the chat a link to the PDF of these guidelines, and they are free for use, certainly adaptable to other settings, other places, utilize components that feel useful to other programs. That's the purpose of this, to share widely. So an important component of this research activity, as you can see the bullet points on the bottom here, really are to ask two important questions, right? For whom is the research benefiting? And of the foundation of any community-based research. For whom is it benefiting? And what are the real-world applications for practice and policy? Next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry. Can you go back one slide? Okay, so this is the research activity. So you jumped, I guess the slides jumped before I realized, sorry. So this process is really a co-development process, multi-phase and reiterative project. So we want to highlight, again, as I said, the research methodology approach behind this, that utilizing those principles of community-based research, so really that co-development of inquiry, it's focused on multiple components, and I've highlighted a few of those here without going too in-depth on the whole research component. A key piece of this was our community advisory boards. That's a really important component, right, to any community-based research, in which includes multiple stakeholders, certainly individuals from Claire Swan, and we had teachers, we had some other Alaska Native Head Start director, other stakeholders around the state to participate in kind of this reiterative process in coming up with the development of these guidelines. We engaged in numerous document reviews. So these are reviews of other existing assessment tools, early childhood best practices regarding assessment and curriculum, and as well as some of our other guiding Alaska tools that are in existence. We engaged in multiple content reviews. So this was kind of part of our external validity process, and those content experts helped to review multiple drafts, really looking at that feasibility of, does this make sense? We included teachers in the content reviews as well. We engaged in a couple different pilot studies, and the pilot studies, I'm sorry, my battery, I need to plug my computer in really quickly. I didn't realize it wasn't plugged. One moment. Okay. Okay, I'm back. So part of the pilot studies, as all of you might imagine, this occurred during COVID. It started before COVID and continued during COVID. So our pilot studies adjusted, that's part of that responsiveness, right, to our context. And our first pilot study included utilizing this tool within the classroom setting and engaging in some real classroom observations. How do these guidelines and reflective tool support teachers? And then we kind of had to adapt to, when COVID came, right, make some adaptations in which we then transitioned to having teachers utilize this tool, and I'll tell you more about it. It's on a rating scale, 1.4 rating scale across a couple different indicators. And then we had teachers kind of do some self-assessment around the use of this tool, and what really actually came about from this process is, well, actually, this is really invaluable and very valuable for them to be utilizing this kind of self-assessment tool. And it was part of that reiterative process that it moved away from being an observation-based tool only to actually using teachers being able to utilize this as part of their own reflective practice for improving their cultural responsive programming and interactions in their setting. And then the last bullet here, you see focus groups. We engage in a number of focus groups, both with teachers and stakeholders around this tool, and multiple revisions. I'm going to say there was at least 12 revisions of this over time. Next slide, please. So the guidelines have 3 focus areas, and each of these 3 focus areas have indicators that are on a 4-point scale. Again, acknowledging that measurement in of itself on a 4-point scale is a very Western way of measuring and looking. So, knowing that that is a component of this and just being aware of what that means in the context is important. So the three are, the first one is culturally responsive early childhood educators identify their own values and gain knowledge about local ways of knowing and being. The second is culturally responsive early childhood educators work closely with families to build and promote home language and culture. And the third focus area was that culturally responsive early childhood educators embed cultural values and traditional knowledge in their curriculum planning. Next slide. I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to pause for a moment because my battery is still, I'm in a hotel room and something's not going right. So I don't know if Brittany, you want to speak just briefly to the Learn and Grow, and then I can hop right back on.
Sure. So Learn and Grow is Alaska's quality rating improvement system, and Learn and Grow has many individuals involved in this partnership, working to build the QRIS system within Alaska. With that, the quality is developed on different levels and a hybrid framework. So levels 1 and 2 are fixed activity points, and levels 3, 4, and 5 are a combination of fixed activities and a choice menu. And Hattie, I'll let you keep going.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. We all have to be flexible, so thank you so much. So as Brittany shared, the Learn and Grow, this is our connection to kind of our policy and practice. So again, as Brittany just shared, Learn and Grow is at the beginning is our resource referral agency in Alaska, and it houses our Alaska's QRIS system. And so where this link comes in between our partnership across Cook Inlet Tribal Council, our research partnership and policy is that the development of the guidelines for culturally responsive reflective practice in birth to 5 settings are now on the choice menu for levels 3 to 5, which is really exciting that we've engaged at kind of the program level to kind of pilot and utilize this tool and begin to examine how it might be a useful tool in supporting programs, both individuals and at the program level. And then now integrating it into supporting kind of culturally responsive practice across our state and with that goal of improving high quality early care and education. And so part of the component of 3, 4, 5 on the fixed activities that programs, it gives some flexibility in what they're focusing on in their own setting. All right, next slide. So we wanted to highlight some reflection on partnerships and process here and recognizing kind of first that research approach, and I've talked about this a little bit before around utilizing that community-based context and really highlighting the benefits of integrating a community-based research approach, which again can utilize both quantitative and qualitative. It does not mean one particular methodology. Really, there's primarily a lot of evidence, again, to support that when you engage with your community partners from the very beginning, right? Not even coming in with the research question developed, but really from the beginning. And I think as a partnership, we've learned that I think we certainly can strengthen this as we move forward in that co-development from the very, very beginning. And that there's really a higher likelihood of sustainability and meaningful change when that co-development happens, where it really de-emphasizes, particularly in this context with Indigenous populations, that we're de-emphasizing some of the Western methodology, where the researcher has a lens. I'm interested in researching this. I think it'll be good for the community, but really that switch, right? The switch to whose voices, for whom is the research benefiting, and enhancing that community voice and representation. And then as we reflect on practice, again, I want to highlight back to, and Connie will expand on this a little bit more, highlight back to what she shared about the cultural programming. So if our purpose here really is about increasing program and teachers' work in culturally responsive programming, as research partners, really needing to highlight and document and share the amazing work that's happening, but also subsequently strengthen practices through that responsive lens, which sees our community partners as equals, listens to those voices of those whom are impacted by the research. And so through our approach and revisions and thinking about the tool, the use of the tool, we really noticed that teachers were really good on reflecting on, about their environment and integrating culture in their environment and through curriculum. The beautiful environment that Connie has in her program and lots of resources and supports. But teachers had a harder time articulating how they were actually teaching those cultural values and even starting to identify what their own cultural values were and how they may be similar or different from the families with whom they're working, which is why if you take a look at the guidelines, that very first focus area about teachers or early educators reflecting on their own cultural practices and understanding, that wasn't there in many of our first reiterations, but we realized we needed to kind of go backwards because we have to be able to examine our own biases and understanding of different cultures, right, before we can implement and support working with families and children. And then lastly, I'll just connect briefly to the policy connection here, again, emphasizing that work with multiple partners, and in our case, through the Community Advisory Board, THREAD, we had members of THREAD participate in our Community Advisory Board as key stakeholders as part of this process. And I'll let Connie share a little bit more.
Thank you. One of the things that we knew was very important was to ensure that we took a look at where we came from, and that was really imbued by one of our cultural curriculum designers, Charmaine Lundy, and she has been a master teacher and taught early childhood, kindergarten, and all the way down to Head Start, and been a program consultant and director over the years, but really lived in a very aware of cultural values. And she was one of the key people that helped design our curriculum. But in order to ensure that we also maintained the frameworks, we were really fortunate to have been able to hire Lori Dennehy, who used to work for Creative Curriculum. And those two made a fantastic team. Not only did they hit it off well, but they really gave each other a lot of synergy. And it was one of the most exciting projects that we've watched. And it didn't matter what kind of feedback we gave. It was always such a positive approach, and their willingness and determination to make sure that this met the need of everything. And it was a big ask because we said we want more than culture focus. We want mindset, and we want places where we deal with trauma. So the Claire Swan program, we have early Head Start, but we also have 6 other grants. And so we were fortunate to be able to use the funding from those grants to help imbue this curriculum that really took a look at some generational trauma, things like that. Of course, that wasn't talked about in the classroom, but parents then were also able to go to talking circles at night. And through that time too, we talked about the importance of a multi-generational approach and multi-generational healing, and really model just that we're all trying to just make our way as best we can through our walk. And we do that with our teachers as well. We work really hard at helping the teachers know that our approach, we want it to be more like we're family, and that they're like aunties. And so if we have a family who maybe is having attendance problems, we don't approach it like, well, you have missed this many class days. And so we have to put you on an attendance plan and a very different approach. Ours is much more like, what's going on, and more like an auntie, because, aunties can scold you in a way that makes you want to do better. And so we'll say, come on, we know you can get here tomorrow, and we'll look forward to that. And so it's a different approach in trying to make sure that families feel supported, but there's accountability and not judgment.
And then I'd just like to add one more piece to that, to talk about the partnership relationships. So these relationships were developed out of this project. They're significant, they're extremely essential, and will impact our work moving forward. When we began this partnership, our team within our organization was new to being involved in research partnerships, and we quickly recognized that there was a huge difference between the operation of programs and the research behind the operation of programs. With the help from Dr. Hirschberg with UAA and her teachings, this significantly assisted our team to better understand the process behind and around research and how it informs programs for the work that we do. With that, we have developed such an amazing partnership and friendship over the past 5 years. On top of the relationship built between the UAA team and CITC, our group has been given the opportunity to build such amazing relationships between UAA, CITC, THREAD, and Claire Swan. I look forward to our continued partnership in years to come. Next slide.
As we close this presentation, we'd like to invite you to put any questions or comments into the chat. And I also want to acknowledge this publication was supported by the Administration for Children and Families, ACF, the United States Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, as part of a Financial Assistance Award, grant number 90YE0210, totaling $852,388, with 100% funded by ACF, HHS. The contents of this are the authors and do not necessarily represent the official view nor an endorsement by ACF, HHS, or the US government. For more information, please visit ACF website, Administration and National Policy Requirements. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hattie, Brittany, and Connie. That was great. So many insights. Right now, we'll take a couple of questions. If anybody has some clarifying questions that they want to ask before we move on to our next presentation. We did see that there were some comments in the chat. It looked like a number of people were kind of adding on based on their experiences. I see that someone is saying that they love how you incorporated this as a choice in the QRIS. And I see a question here about, do you find that implementing practices to support teacher reflection is supported by coaching? Does anyone want to take that, just a short version, and then we can follow up at the end for more discussion?
Sure. Yes, we do have a coach, and one of the things that we have done with this intentional is several in-service days where Charmaine Lundy and Lori Danahy introduced the curriculum, had talking circles in the classrooms with the teachers on how does this impact you? How will you implement it? How is it important to you? And just some general discussions. Then after that, we also have a coach who also works with this, and he does a great job, but I know we want to keep it short, so I will just leave it at that. Thank you so much for the question.
Thanks so much, Connie, for that additional clarification. So now, next slide, I'm going to turn it over to our friends in Georgia to talk about Georgia's Lifting Infants and Toddlers Through Language-Rich Environments, the Little Grants. Thea, Shayna?
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Thea Stevens, and I am the Infant Toddler Program Manager here at the Georgia Department of Early Care and Learning. And I am also joined by Shayna Funk, who is the Lead Policy and Business Operations Analyst here at DCAL. So thank you and welcome to our presentation. Next slide, please. So the Georgia Department of Early Care and Learning is responsible for meeting the child care and early education needs of Georgia's children and their families. It administers the nationally recognized Georgia's Pre-K program, is responsible for the licensing and regulation of child care homes, centers and home-based child care, manages Quality Rated, Georgia's Quality Rated and Improvement System, administers child care and parent services, which is called CAPS, which is Georgia's subsidy program, and federal nutrition programs and services. The department also houses the Head Start State Collaboration Office, distributes federal funding to enhance the quality and availability of child care within inclusion services and infant and toddler supports, works collaboratively with Georgia Child Care Resources and referral agencies, several quality initiatives, professional development programs, grants, and organizations throughout the state to enhance early care and education. Next slide, please. So what are the Little Grants? DCAL's Infant Toddler Program works with child care centers and family child care homes to improve the quality of care for infants and toddlers through technical assistance, professional development, and coaching. Our largest focus has been on the implementation of the Little Grant, which stands for Lifting Infants and Toddlers Through Language-Rich Environments. We have been able to serve both center and home-based learning programs. The purpose of the Little Grant is to support the language and literacy skills of infants and toddlers through increasing teacher confidence and competence in using responsive caregiving practices as a tool to build literacy skills. Also, the development of a peer coach to support and coach infant and toddler teachers, and the strengthening of program leadership skills in supporting positive, responsive, and high-quality infant and toddler classrooms. All 2- and 3-star quality rated child care centers in Georgia were eligible and were invited to participate in the Little Grant. Applications were scored by DCAL staff, and selected programs were awarded the grant. We have had 6 cohorts of the Little Grant, featuring 3 child care centers, cohorts for child care centers, and 3 cohorts for family child care homes. As you can see in the table, we had 153 center applicants and 87 family child care home applicants. We awarded the Little Grant to 85 child care centers and 60 family child care homes. So since 2017, Little has served 145 programs and over 550 teachers. Next slide, please. So let's talk about some of the structure of the Little Grant. The Little Grant participants include the director or a Little Grant administrator, a peer coach, and infant toddler teachers that will work in the selected grant classrooms. The participants participate in professional development sessions such as quarterly language and literacy institutes, weekly coaching sessions that include classroom observations between the infant toddler specialist and the peer coach coaching of infant and toddler teachers using data from LENA and class observations. Grant participants utilize data collection and evaluations through their work with the LENA Growth software, which stands for Language Environment Analysis. This is used to measure weekly talk and speech patterns in the grant classrooms. LENA data is collected by having each child in the classroom wear a vest with a built-in recorder that is shown here, as you can see on the screen, and it tracks their speech throughout the day across a 12-week period. So basically, it's like a Fitbit for words. Also, grant participants undergo 2 class observations each year to observe and document teacher-child interactions. Little Grant programs also receive language and literacy materials and supplies for each of their grant classrooms, and grant participants receive stipends for attending those professional development sessions. The center-based programs also receive funding for the peer coach's salary and the cost for travel to trainings, support of an infant and toddler teacher to pursue a higher credential like a CDA or a TCC, staff attendance at additional trainings or conferences related to early language and literacy, monthly professional learning communities for teachers and peer coaches, and a monthly literacy forum for directors and peer coaches. Next slide. So according to the Georgia Quality Study in 2009, 2/3 of infant and toddler classrooms were rated low quality. Among child care centers that are quality rated, 86% reported serving infants and or toddlers in 2017. These child care centers that served infants and or toddlers were significantly more likely to be not rated or 1-star and less likely to be a 2- or 3-star quality rated center than those that did not serve infants and or toddlers. 2017, former Georgia Governor Nathan Deal set a goal that every child in Georgia should be reading on grade level by the end of the 3rd grade. With data showing a need to increase the quality of infant and toddler care in Georgia, the Little Grant was created. This professional learning grant was funded by the Sandra Dunnigan Deal Center for Early Language and Literacy and the Governor's Office of Student Achievement, GOSA, to support infant and toddler classrooms across the state in implementing strong language and literacy instruction for children in the earliest and most critical years of life. From this partnership, the Little Grant was designed with the goal of supporting and fostering early language and literacy among infants and toddlers through a variety of coaching and professional development supports for providers over a 2-year period. The Little Grant was also created with the goal of developing an infant and toddler workforce pipeline that helps teachers advance their knowledge and skills while improving the quality of education for infants and toddlers across the state of Georgia. Originally, the grant was called the Early Language and Literacy Classroom Grant and was changed to the Little Grant in 2018. Now we will hear from Shana Funk, who will tell us about the research and evaluation process for the Little Grant.
All right, thank you so much, Thea, for that great overview of Little, and we can go to the next slide. And just want to say hi again to everyone. Thanks for joining us. And I'm Shana Funk from the Georgia Department of Early Care and Learning's internal research team. And I'm going to talk a little bit about our policy research partnership for evaluating Little. So the program staff that created Little asked DECAL's internal research team to help evaluate the grants when they first began in 2017. So the research team often works with our programs to evaluate key initiatives like Little. Anytime we have a new initiative like this, we of course want to make sure we're asking how it's working and how it can improve. So in the case of Little, one of the most important roles for the research team at first was just that we tracked and coordinated the data that was being collected from several different sources. And we were just kind of being the connection between all of the partners working on Little. And then we have DECAL's program leadership and the infant toddler specialists that work on Little. Sorry about that, I had a little pop-up come up. So DECAL's program leadership and the infant toddler specialists that work on Little, they of course determined what they needed to know about Little so we could create an evaluation plan alongside their expertise with them. So they're also the ones that are providing professional development to programs in Little and collecting the classroom assessment scoring system or class data from observations, which is part of the data that we look at for this evaluation. And then we have the LENA team, who are the developers of the language environment analysis or the LENA technology and the LENA Grow program that Little uses. And Thea already gave a great overview of LENA, but I'll just remind you that it essentially consists of recording devices that the infants and toddlers wear that track their language use in the classroom. And they're also the ones training Little participants on the LENA devices, and all the data collected from the devices is housed with them there at LENA. And finally, we partnered with researchers from Child Trends to conduct the formal analysis of the data collected through Little, including the class and LENA data. So although we do have our own internal research team, we don't always have the capacity to run more formal evaluations, and particularly when we're evaluating our own programs and we want to make sure those results are objective and appropriate to publish and share with other states and researchers, we consult experts like Child Trends to do that for us. So our team is working among all these partners to share the data where needed and ensure that the evaluation remains helpful to the program staff throughout, and also just keeping all the partners in the loop on these moving parts. And we can go to the next slide. So what were we really evaluating? We wanted to know, did child-teacher interactions improve as a result of participation in Little for these programs? And to answer this question, Child Trends evaluated data that was collected during the first 2 years of the Little grants, which were the 2017-2018 and the 2018-2019 school years. And I'll also specify that at this time, these were all our Child Care Learning Center cohorts. We hadn't yet started with our Family Child Care Learning Homes, but we do serve Family Child Care Learning Homes through Little now. So they looked at the class infant and class toddler observations data that was collected from the classrooms. They also looked at the data points collected from Lena Grow, and they did also look at participant demographics of the teachers and administrators that participated in the grants, but we're just going to be looking at the class and Lena today. And we can go to the next slide. So first, looking at the class data, the specific question Child Trends was investigating was, did the teacher-child interactions as measured by the class infant and class toddler improve over the course of the Little grant years? And just to give some context about the class data, DECAL's infant toddler specialists conduct both formal and informal class observations throughout the grant year for coaching purposes with the teachers. So here, Child Trends is looking at just the class scores from those formal observations. In the first year of the program, we had 3 formal observations each year, one at a pre-time point at the start of the school year, at a mid-time point, and then at a post point in the spring. But by the second year, the specialists moved to conducting just the pre and post observations. They found that they weren't getting much out of the midpoint, and that's what they've continued to do since. So 2 formal class observations each year. And I also do just want to give an overview of the class. Class infant is, of course, used in infant classrooms, and class toddler in toddler classrooms. And they are observation tools designed to measure the quality of teacher-child interactions. So for class infant, this includes what's called a domain of responsive caregiving, which is made up of 4 different dimensions that these specialists observe and score. And class toddler has 2 domains, which are engaged support for learning and emotional and behavioral support, which are composed of 5 dimensions and 3 dimensions, respectively, that the specialists are observing and scoring. So now just moving on to the results. Child Trends found that both in year 1 and in year 2 of the Little grants, the responsive caregiving domain scores in infant classrooms increased significantly from the pre to post time point. And similarly for toddlers in both years of the grants, they found that the engaged support for learning domain and the emotional and behavioral support domain in those toddler classrooms increased significantly. So this is just really exciting to see that classrooms participating in Little really were seeing improvements in those teacher-child interactions based on the class. And again, that was for both infants and toddler classrooms. And we can go to the next slide now. So now looking at the data collected from the Lena devices, the specific question Child Trends looked at was, did the number of words the adults spoke and the number of back and forth conversational turns between adults and children increase over the course of the Little grant years? So the number and the timing of Lena recordings varied by classroom because, like the class observations, they're also primarily used for coaching purposes with the teachers. So Child Trends created 2 analysis time points for each center, with the first 3 recordings of the year as the pre-data point and the last 3 as the post. And that's where we're looking at results coming from. So at both of these time points, they looked at the hourly averages for adult word count and for conversational turns. So what do those measures mean? Well, adult word count is exactly as it sounds. It's the number of words the adult spoke to the child while wearing the recording device. And conversational turns refers to the back and forth exchanges between an adult and a child. So just like hitting a ping pong ball back and forth, when there's alternating speech between an adult and a child with no more than 5 seconds in between, that's considered a conversational turn. So if a teacher says to a toddler, "How is your snack?" and the toddler responds back, "Good," that's one conversational turn for that child. And this is for any speech-like sounds that aren't identified as crying. So a toddler's made-up words or an infant's sounds all count for conversational turns. So looking at the results, Child Trends did not find any significant changes in the language environment by either of these measures in year 1 or year 2 of the grants. They did see some pretty wide variations between the minimum and maximum word counts and the conversational turns per hour, which tells us that the language environment might really be differing greatly from classroom to classroom and center to center, which is interesting and worthy of further exploration in itself, I think. So while it's disappointing that we didn't see any significant growth here, I do think there's more we can look at in the future. And at the end of the day, this was meant to be a coaching tool, which we do hear from teachers and specialists has been really helpful for them to see this representation of the language environment in their classrooms and learn from that. We can go to the next slide. So finally, we just want to touch on some lessons learned. So from a research perspective, we learned it's definitely challenging to track and analyze data collected for professional development purposes. The main function of the class observations and the Lean and Grow program was to use those periodic assessments and results to show teachers what things are looking like in the classroom and then coach them on improving their interaction practices. And in that sense, I think our program folks would say they've worked really great. On the evaluation side, we piggybacked on that data that was already being collected to answer the questions that we had about Little. And what I like about this is that we weren't having to ask the programs to do more for the evaluation because these are already really time-intensive grants for them. But on the flip side, with us relying on others for the data collection and not having a clear system set up beforehand, we didn't have unique identifiers for teachers in classrooms, which sometimes made them impossible to link and prevented us from being able to do some more rigorous data analyses. And we also could not track teacher turnover, which I think could really inform a lot here. So as we think about doing a more rigorous evaluation of Little in the future, we know we would need to spend some time setting up ID systems, improving data collection to ensure we can track additional data points better and be able to answer just more questions in general about how Little is working. And now I'm just going to pass it back over to Thea to talk from the policy and practice perspective.
Awesome. Thank you, Shayna. So with the policy perspective, the perception of the role of infant and toddler teachers has changed as Little Grant teachers feel appreciated and valued as professionals and not just glorified babysitters. This has led to some participants deciding to further their education by pursuing a degree in early childhood education or an infant and toddler credential. Survey results have shown that the major success of the Little Grant has been the positive feedback received from teachers and directors about the professional development trainings and the impact these trainings have had on grant participants. Teachers' understanding of high-quality infant and toddler care has increased and has raised their awareness of their teaching practices and ultimately has led to increased and improved interactions with children in the classrooms, as we could see in the class data. This has also led to the expansion of the Little Grant for a second year in the content for the Foundations of Coaching Peer Coach Forum, and quarterly institutes were tailored and updated to expand upon the content from that first year. All teachers received a My Teachstone account through class where they can access and share trainings and resources with each other, receive feedback and suggested resources from their peer coach, and infant toddler specialists based on their class and LENA data. From the practice perspective, another lesson we've learned is that programs want more of Little, and they wish it could be longer than a 2-year grant. This led to the launch of an extension of the Little Grant to previous Little Child Care Center-based participants. Little Extension builds on the work of the initial Little Grant by providing previous Little participants additional support through professional development, coaching, and data collection to improve classroom practice. Little Extension launched this year on February 1st and will end on July 31st. 22 programs are currently participating, and we are working to offer another round of the Little Extension in the fall of this year. We have also sent out a feedback survey to our previous Little Family Child Care Homes participants, and most of them, again, requested more time in the Little Grant. So we are planning to extend the timeline from 6 months to 9 months and plan to launch our 4th cohort of the Little Grant with Family Child Care Homes in the fall of 2022. Through our work with LENA Grow, we discovered an opportunity to implement another program offered through LENA called LENA Start. The LENA Start opportunity is offered to DECAL staff and DECAL family peer ambassadors who have children that are 33 months of age or younger. And this is used to build school readiness and strengthen families with parent group classes. The goals of Lena Star are to increase DECAL staff and family peer ambassador knowledge of DECAL's infant toddler program, interactive talk, what high quality responsive care looks like, and increased exposure to early talk for children of DECAL staff and our family peer ambassadors. So now we'll turn it right on back over to Shayna.
Thank you, Thea. We can go to the next slide. So as we close this presentation, I'd like to invite everyone to put any questions or comments in the chat. And I also want to acknowledge that this study was supported by the Administration for Children and Families, ACS, of the United States U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, as a part of a financial assistance award, grant number 90YE0202, totaling $1 million with 100% funded by ACF HHS. The contents are those of the authors and do not necessarily represent the official views of, nor an endorsement by ACF HHS or the U.S. government. And for more information, please visit the ACF website, Administrative and National Policy Requirements. And I also just want to acknowledge our wonderful partners at Child Trends that conducted this evaluation for us. And you can find the full report of their results on DECAL's website. And I believe that link is posted in the chat.
Thanks so much, Thea and Shayna. Every time I hear this, I learn even more. We really appreciate you being with us here today. First, we'll pause for some clarifying questions specifically on their presentation, and then we'll move on to a general discussion. So I see a question here. Did you find that using Lena Grow in itself made teachers aware of their interactions and improved the number of words or back and forth interactions?
Yes, I can expound on that. Definitely it made them much more aware. The data was so very black and white for the teachers that it was very understandable for them. One of the things is they received a weekly report on how everything went on their recording days. So they could see their progress as they're going throughout each week. They could also see particular times of the day that they may want to increase their talk in the classroom. You may see in your data that around 11 o'clock that we're not talking as much. So we're asking and coaching them around what is happening in the classroom around that time. And most of the time it's lunchtime. So during lunchtime, let's make sure that we're sitting down with the children, eating lunch with them, talking about the foods that they're eating or what may be going on in their classroom, what activities that we may have during the day to increase those interactions and that teacher talk during those times.
Thanks so much, Thea, for that clarification. All right, next slide. So the rest of our time together really is to be focused on questions and reflections or comments for either of the panelists, any of the panelists, all of the panelists. Please drop them into chat or use the reactions button to raise your hand. We could unmute you and you could ask your question directly. We'd love to hear from all of you, especially CCDF lead agency staff. And as Laura has said, please post your questions in the chat. While we wait to see if we get any more questions, I do have a couple of observations. What I heard from both teams was not everything went exactly as planned. And of course, for both of them, part of the time that they were doing this work, we were in the pandemic, which was of course a surprise for everybody. And everybody had to pivot to get through that. It sounded like even though perhaps not everything, the outcomes were not necessarily what folks thought they might be, that there were other positive benefits that they didn't anticipate, and that in both teams, thinking about families and working with families were really important. I know one thing we didn't hear about in this presentation, but in some of our discussions behind the scenes were some of the challenges related to teaching staff continuing with their programs, which is always a challenge in early care and education. All right, so we've got a question here. Let's see. So we have, how do you find the QRIS impacting school district programs? Are school districts with preschool or pre-K programs engaging in QRIS coaching, building reflective capacity of educators, or other best practices we've discussed today? I guess, why don't we start with Georgia, and then the CITC team, you can let us know if that's something that that your work connects with as well. Thea or Shana?
Hi. Okay. I was reading the question again to make sure I had it right. Yes, there are child care centers that offer that have pre-K in their classrooms. They do the class observations. They use class, and they have the quality. We have the quality rated system as well. So I believe that they do merge the two, where they may provide some technical assistance and coaching to those teachers around their practices and the observation data that may come from the class observations. There are 3 dimensions within the pre-K tool, class tool. So it's a little bit differently. And in all honesty, I am unsure of the pre-K class tool and how QRS is measured in preschool, because I've only been working with infant and toddler classrooms, even as a teacher.
Right. Thanks, Thea, for giving an answer and reminding us we are talking. Thea is the infant toddler program manager, and the little grants are focused on infants and toddlers. Hattie, I think you said that you can talk a little bit about Alaska.
Sure, I can just briefly respond to that, and then we have Carol, who is our thread representative also. In Alaska, our QRIS system is an opt-in, so it is not yet required by all programs. And so most, I would say, and Carol, you can correct me, school districts, we have such a vast difference in numbers, right? Like our largest Anchorage area school district has numerous resources, and so they do integrate coaching and numerous best practices. They're not part of our QRIS system. And then in other school districts, many of our rural school districts where resources are vastly different, coaching may be non-existent. Carol, do you want to add to that at all?
Sure, I can add for programs that are Learn and Grow currently that we have under these are Head Start preschool programs. We actually provide a cultural training, whether it is by thread, or we provide them, with a bank of different areas where they can take these trainings related to cultural responsive practices. And we will kind of align that with the tool and the coaching cycles. The educator then will be responsible to decide, what they want to strengthen and work on. But it works really beautifully. And yes, the coaching is an imperative part to make that happen in the classroom.
Great, Carol, thank you. And by the way, Carol is with Thread and joining us in the background here as one of the partners in the CITC work. So we have this question here for the Georgia team about whether any of the Lena classrooms were bilingual or multilingual, and if so, did you notice any difference with English-only classrooms?
We did have some classrooms that were bilingual. You may have had a teacher that spoke Spanish and mostly spoke Spanish with the children, but there was still another teacher in the classroom that spoke English as well. It didn't really affect the scores any more than anything, because it's about the communication that's going back and forth. And even with that, when they turn in their consent forms, we talk about the language that is mostly used in the classroom. And so it's just mostly about what is being said to them and what is saying back, those back and forth conversations, and how much adult words are being used in the classroom. It wasn't a lot of I will say it wasn't a lot of classrooms that were bilingual though.
I want to say, Thea, I think we had more of our family child care learning home providers were Spanish speakers and maybe had bilingual programs. I don't think we saw that it really made a huge impact to the data, but that definitely could be something interesting to look at further in the future.
Great, thanks so much, Thea and Sheena. And I think we can answer just one more question, but really short. So from a QRIS specialist in Minnesota, asks if the Alaska team could speak more about encouraging reflective practice for continuous improvement rather than an evaluative process. And they're thinking about the STAR level system they have in Minnesota.
I have one real quick thought, and then probably Hattie has some better insights. But one of the things that I think is important to recognize is that traditionally and culturally, we don't assess our children. You know, we didn't have a rubric. We watched how children grew, and then we met them where they were at. And so one of the things that we struggle with sometimes, I think, is trying to mix both the Western model and our traditional model. And so that's some of the things that we do we have our coach meet with our teachers to talk about and do a reflective approach. And the thing about that is it also enables the teachers to take a look at what they're doing well and what they can grow on, and really we want to reinforce their strengths. And we also are starting to use the swivel camera, and I'm so excited about what our other program is doing. You guys are doing a great job, and I really appreciate it and loved hearing your program as well.
Great, Connie. Thank you so much for addressing that. And I'm sure we could have much more rich conversation, but we're down to our last 2 minutes here. Ivy, could you bring the slides back up again? So we did want to remind everyone that the resources from this webinar will be available in the future. You can check out the OPRE websites for various slides, audio recordings, and transcripts of webinars posted a few months after each of the webinars. Also, you can check out the Building Childcare Research Capacity webpage for slides from past webinars and other resources. And we are pleased to announce a new webinar series for CCDF lead agencies that we are beginning in June. The first webinar will be on developing research questions to get answers for policy and practice, and will feature speakers from CCDF lead agencies. If you have questions, feel free to email me, Teresa Derrick Mills, at tderick-mills, MILLS, @urban.org. And please take our exit poll as you're headed out. Ivy, if you could put that up, and just helps us with our planning so that we know that this has been a good use of your time, and how much you feel like you've learned while spending time with us today. Thank you again to all of our speakers. We really appreciate it. And for all of you for spending some of your time with us today. We know you have many things to do and many things to learn, and we appreciate you spending that time with us. Ivy, if you could keep this up for just a few minutes while we let people respond to the poll. And thanks again, speakers, for all your time.